Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Mark Lomas. Now, Mark, as many of you probably know already, is the head of equality, diversity and inclusion at HS2 Rail. Mark and the organisation have won numerous awards, including everything from the ENEI Awards for Inclusive Procurement, Innovation with Impact in Overall Public Sector winner categories, through to the Best Supplier Diversity Programme and the Women in Rail Top Employers. Mark has delivered himself personally multiple inclusion projects, both in the UK and also internationally. He's had a number of decades worth of experience working from organisations across a wide variety of sectors, everything across from financial reporting, the FS industry, through to the BBC, Sheffield University, through to the NHS Clinical Commissioning Group boards, and even well-known television broadcasting organisations like ITV. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And I know that that was a real short snippet of your career history to date, because, oh my goodness, there's been so many different things that you've done across countless sectors, and even kind of run your own business. And so I think it will be really interesting, just for those perhaps who don't know you as well as I do, whether you could just unpick a little bit some of the career background and ultimately how you came to be where you are today, having won these multiple awards in lots of different areas of diversity and inclusion.
Sure. So I guess it's a fairly winding road that got me where I am now. All my background in education was in music. I graduated from the Juilliard School. I'm from Bermuda originally, and I made my way to England. I was 19 when I finished university, and I was set on a sort of career in music. And then I sort of found out that the industry operated in a very different way than I was used to. Essentially, it was all about networks, whereas I was always used to auditioning for orchestral work, chamber music work, solo work, etc. And as a 19-year-old sort of black kid from Bermuda arriving in the middle of the classical music industry, which is what I was trained in, I had absolutely no network, and I found it incredibly frustrating. So I used all the skills I had to do music production and a number of other things. And to cut a long story short, eventually I got incredibly fed up. And I thought, right, well, I'm going to head back to Bermuda for 3 weeks, take a little break and see what I want to do. I think I landed in Bermuda at 6:35, and by 9 o'clock that evening, I had a really, really well-paid job. And I thought, well, isn't that odd? Nothing has changed about me whatsoever, but the way people see my value has changed immeasurably. And that was the first thing that got me a little bit interested in why that was. So I returned to the UK, and the team that I was working with, they went off to do some tours, and my daughter was just born, and I wasn't going to win that argument, having a baby girl and then going off on tour. So I decided to stay in the UK, and I'd always done summer work for disability charities in Bermuda. So a role came up with a disability charity, and I thought, well, I'll do that for a couple of months, and keep me out of trouble and give me something interesting to do. And sort of as I worked there were more and more things I was just a little bit confused about why they did things a certain way. And I was probably a bit of a pain in the backside to my regional manager at the time. And one day she said to me, "Do you know, I've got something that I think you should go to." I said, "Yeah, okay, sounds like a jolly day off work to me. Brilliant. Yeah, no disagreement from me." And she sent me to their national EDI steering group meeting. And I attended that meeting, and I pointed out some things that I thought that they didn't do well and how they could do them differently. The CEO was in that meeting, as was the HR director. I had kind of no background in business, and particularly where I'm from, we value direct communication. And after the meeting, the CEO gave me a couple of tips about maybe being a little less direct, but what I said was sensible. That's how I got into diversity, and my experience grew from there. And 15, 20 years later, I suppose I have what I regard as one of the most interesting D&I jobs in the country, primarily because someone spotted what they thought was a bit of talent, a way of thinking, and presented me with an opportunity. So if there was a critical moment in my career path, that was it.
Wow, what a story. I love it. From music production and Bermuda through to being classically trained, which I by the way, really appreciate talented musicians and know how much dedication that can take, having been in bands in early years, but through to where you are. I mean, what a journey. And just picking up on a piece that you said there, Mark, if you don't mind, when your then CEO and HR director had kind of said, wow, kind of really direct and given you this opportunity, which is wonderful. Talk to me about how, was that because it seems a rather unusual thing to say, hey, you're really direct, and because of that, we'd love to bring you on as our new D&I exec. Was it unusual at that time then to kind of have a slightly different mindset and way of thinking in terms of who they had within their management team?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would have said I was pretty rude in that meeting. I won't say what I said, because probably couldn't put it out. But,
no, it's fine. Say what you wish. I love it.
It was tremendously honest from my point of view. But after that, I had a conversation with the CEO, and he said, "Look, if anyone else talked to me like that, probably I'd be firing them." But I hear the sense in what you're saying. But there's a difference between what you say and how it lands with people. And I think looking back on it, we developed what I would describe as something of an informal mentoring relationship. And I was part of that diversity group probably for about another year. And then the role sort of came up, and I didn't apply. So just before the deadline, the HR director called and said, "I don't see an application from you." Why? I said, well, to be blunt, I've never really thought about applying for it. Half my mind is whether I should go back to music, and then yada, yada, yada. And to be honest, I would just want to do things very, very differently. So if you hired me, it would be because we would do things very differently. And I don't know if that's what you want or not. So they said, well, listen, why don't you apply, go for the interviews, and see what happens after that. So I got the role, and we set about doing things really quite differently. And at the time, the charity was running large New Deal for disabled people contracts, and part of what I did there was have a look at not only how they were engaging with employers, but what contract performance looked like for various diverse groups, and adapting what we did on sort of local areas or regional areas, which had a really good impact on the contract performance. So it took D&I from a place where it was about keeping people happy and engaging staff and doing the right thing, and really made it about bottom line performance. And I think I've taken that kind of evidence-based approach through to every other role that I've done in D&I. And I suppose one of my frustrations, I suppose, with the sector is often people do the same things which haven't had any result over 20 years, or certainly not the results that they want, but they lack the evidence to know how to adjust it. And particularly, with the role I have at HS2, I like to describe it as treating diversity as an engineering problem. You find the point of failure and you fix that point of failure, and the results then tend to speak for themselves. They change for the positive. But that was a wonderful introduction to diversity, working at that disability charity, and really learning my craft with an immense amount of autonomy and scope. And it is the reason, as I progressed through sectors, that I've ended up where I have.
It's superb, Mark, that I mean, it's the way you talk about diversity, inclusion, belonging, equality it is very scientific in a good way. You know, I know that you and I are singing from the same hymn sheet here when we're talking to others about the fact that diversity, inclusion and belonging, equality is a strategic priority. It's not a nice to have in any way, shape or form. You know, but also interestingly, you mentioned there working across many different sectors. And, you know, obviously with my other hat on with, you know, I guess running, you know, still an exec search firm, as well as obviously doing the work with Dial, I notice how often organizations like to stick with people they would deem safe, in inverted commas, within their own sector. And that frustrates the life out of me, if I'm honest, because some of the greatest pieces of innovation are through diversity of, you know, it's diversity of experience, right? It's diversity, you know, diversity simply means difference, and that is also sector. Yet still, even when it comes to often, you know, diversity and inclusion roles, for example, people are looking at the same sectors. And when you look at your background, it's like you've literally, that richness of experience and clarity that you have when I speak with you, I'm sure must in part, and you know, obviously feel free to agree or disagree with me, is that richness of working within so many diverse sectors. You know, you take any of them in their individuality and there's so many similarities. Not that similarity is a bad thing, but it's how can you foster innovation when you're all used to working in a very, very similar process type of way? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. You know, most sectors have some kind of individual challenges, you know, some nuances. But essentially, what I've found is that the main building blocks of effective diversity, inclusion, belonging, etc., are pretty much the same. But you can take bits of learning, bits of practice from other sectors which have worked and adapt them. One of the things we've done very effectively at HS2 is introduce something called blind auditioning, which is a recruitment methodology which removes CVs and applications entirely. It's sort of a skills-based anonymous assessment. And the results for diverse groups are superb using the sort of blind auditioning methodology. But that's a methodology that we picked up from American orchestras in the 1970s. When I went to music school, I always had to audition behind a screen. And you weren't allowed to wear your shoes when you walked on the stage to start your audition because they could tell the difference between the shoes. And so we like to look for methodologies that have produced results, then look at how we can adapt them, what the evidence is. And for me, it's about the impact and effectiveness of what you do. And if you've been running a mentoring program to support promotions for 15, 20 years, and you still got the same makeup of your senior leadership team, well, it's not effective. So find where the point of failure is and change it. And we've taken that approach with me sort of wherever I went. But in every sector, I find there is something useful that you can learn and adapt. And there are plenty of things which you go, well, that hasn't worked for anyone across any of the sectors, so we won't bother repeating what doesn't work. But yes, for me, it's been incredibly informative.
Absolutely. And they say the age-old adage is, you know, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there is just so much transferable knowledge from different sectors. You know, there really, really is. And, you know, again, you know, I guess reverting into some of the, you know, as you would say, you know, looking at methodologies and kind of looking at, you know, the power of evidence when it comes to decision making. I know you utilize a lot of that when it comes to supplier diversity, which I think is such a fascinating subject. And obviously we see, in particular over in the States, you have, some of these organizations like, $1 billion round table. And, know when it comes to, say, UK organizations, as well, you look at what HS2 has done, and the framework that's been built is second to none. Talk to me a little bit about, what supplier diversity means, why it is so incredibly critical for organizations now and, obviously moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us it's twofold. HS2's strategic goals around skills and employment and involving businesses from around the UK. And when you look at the makeup of the construction sector, where 60% of the work is done by subcontracting, well, you're not going to change the way a sector operates overnight. It's not immediately going to become direct in employment as a majority. So how do you foster that? And given the size of contracts that HS2 operates, the opportunity was really clear. Here's an opportunity to put in place an inclusive procurement model across all the procurement processes, contract management, lifecycle reporting, which has an absolute impact on what comes out the other side. And I think there were a number of things. It's built into every stage of our procurement process: the pre-qualification, the ITT, or the technical questions, contract management, reporting, etc. But the most important thing, I think, and I'd love to claim this was a stroke of genius, but it really wasn't. It was
go for it.
it was timing. So we had large contracts which are about to go out the door, and understanding how we could leverage our procurement power the best. And our research indicated that the difference between winning and losing a major tender could be between 3 and 4%. So we deliberately set the weighting for diversity and skills higher than that. Why? Because that gave the sector a business case for diversity. You want to work with HS2. Health and safety is critically important. Environment is critically important, and D&I is part of those HS2 values. And therefore, with a very clear requirement about what we were looking for, the diversity of the workforce, how much you're spending with diverse suppliers, wanting our supply chain to achieve externally verified EDI accreditation, making sure 100% of people are trained in relevant aspects of D&I. We were able to be very clear about what we wanted and support our supply chain to get there, because that's also critically important. We provide digital tools, everything from sort of diversity crosswords and word searches to sort of more sophisticated digital tools that give you the diversity and socioeconomic makeup of every local authority along the HS2 route at a touch of a button, etc. Primarily because it's about delivering the legacy, the benefits for HS2. And that was the way we would do it. And that reaches into our inclusive design approach with our stations and trains. We want to have the most inclusive, accessible transport service possible. And that starts from the procurement. Process. And it is where the bang for our buck is going to be. So it is something we were very proud of, because it's very well embedded across the program, and we can see the impact that is having all across the sector. It's not just HS2 which are winning D&I awards. Our supply chain are now starting to win D&I awards for the work they're doing to satisfy our procurement requirement. They're taking what they do for us and rolling it out across other contracts. And we see the sector, Highways England, National Rail, TfL, working with us, and we're working together to align those requirements to create efficiencies for the sector. So we're very proud of our work in that regard. Nothing's perfect. There's always more to do. But it is part of our story about how that HS2 pound reaches communities up and down the UK. And I think for other organizations in different sectors, you can't always fix things with direct employment. but you can be really positive, creative, innovative about what your organization does and who they spend their money with and how that reaches into different communities. And there are brand benefits to that. There's commercial benefits to managing risk and spreading risk across the supply chain. It's innumerable what the opportunities are. So our inclusive procurement model is something very, very close to our heart, and of course something that we're willing to share with everyone. HS2 is a huge program, but our approach isn't resource intensive. It's light touch, it's well thought through, the reporting methodology is well established, and critically it delivers the evidence we want. At this point, all major HS2 contracts are outperforming the industry in terms of diverse representation. No mean feat when it's all engineering and construction contracts in the main. And of course, as the program expands, those challenges will get harder. But the organizations in our supply chain are maturing their D&I approach with us constantly, and that gives me confidence that in the long term we'll be in a very, very good place.
There are so many rich, juicy pearls of wisdom and learning to be taken from that snippet that you described there. I know I'm sounding really geeky here, but oh my God, it is just so interesting getting into the nuts and bolts of all of those different facets. And I can hear people kind of asking, our listeners who would be tuning in when they watch and listen to this podcast eventually thinking, yes, but how is it relevant to me? And you mentioned there how transferable all of this is into other industries, which I absolutely, truly believe that it is, and actually reverts all the way back to the beginning of our conversation here, because it is beneficial to communities. It's great for branding. As you say, it's a responsible way of spending money that's going to be spent anyway. And so wouldn't you rather spend with, in simplistic terms here, wouldn't you rather spend money with a organization that is benefiting local community as opposed to X? But I wonder, just for those individuals and organizations thinking, yes, this is fantastic, but how us? How can others learn from transferring this over into their organizations? Because, as you say, with diversity and inclusion and belonging and equality, it's an evolution. It's never going to be perfect, but that's also like saying, we are complete as human beings. We can always learn more. It's an evolution. It's it's a never-ending process ultimately, that we always want to get better at. But I just wondered your thoughts there, I guess, on on transferable pieces that people can be taking, and also I think the future of diverse and inclusive procurement, because I truly believe this is one of the many key routes to unlocking true diversity within organizations as a whole.
Well, that's right. I think we have some publicly available case studies on YouTube about SMEs going through our procurement process and the shape of things to come video on YouTube, which very simplistically describes what our procurement requirements are. But we're also happy to share our inclusive procurement model, what we ask at the various stages, how we're set up to do the monitoring and reporting. So we're more than happy to share that. I think it is very important for organizations to consider where they can make the most impact. And again, this isn't necessarily about applying this to every single purchasing decision that you're making. It is about where you're going to get the most impact. Where is it sensible to apply it? And critically, what are you trying to achieve? Is it innovation? Is it engaging with communities? Is it the kind of spreading your pound around your customers? Is it commercial management of risk so that all of your supply chain or your contracts aren't sitting with one supplier, and if they fail, you're in a real problem? So I would advise people to have a look at their business. What is it they want to achieve, and then work backwards from that point.
I think that's really good advice, Mark. And I think it's just, not only is it obviously the right thing to do for humanity, wider business and wider society, but it's also hugely beneficial commercially, which and whatever way you look at it. And you know, I guess, as you say, you know, if an organization is looking to, say, improve its CSR objectives or whatever that might be, actually there is a place at some point within the supply chain in those objectives that can be achieved through, you know, purchasing, you know, the right goods, right services from those places that would be aligned with those core values. And you know, certainly for us, as I mean, we are a relatively small organization, but work with a lot of large, you know, large corporate organizations. And it's interesting watching, you know, how the landscape has slightly changed, in that we're being asked more so now from some of the large organizations about the ownership status even of our business. You know, are you a minority owned business? You know, do you adhere to these practices and procedures? And you know, whilst I think we with anything, with any small, you know, SME or anyone who's listening who has kind of a small to medium sized enterprise, thinking, oh my goodness, more paperwork, but you know, actually, as long as it's kept relatively simple and straightforward, and it's asking the right questions, is so incredibly valuable, because ultimately that's cash that would be spent anyway if it can come from different places. As you put it, you know, spreading that pound out or spreading that dollar out, it is, you know, it's the bang for the buck, as you put it, which I think is just superb.
Yeah, and there are lots of ways for SMEs, particularly, that things can be done in a very low cost way. You know, we have SMEs that work with us, and you know, they use Smart Survey, which has UK servers for GDPR reasons, and they use that as a tool to collect workforce diversity data where they might not have an old singing, old dancing HR system. They use various organizations like the Supply Chain Sustainability School, who have free e-learning and free webinars around diversity and inclusion, etc. For suppliers that engage with us, you know, we have videos on why you should do diversity monitoring, digital tools like I described before, things like crosswords and games that you can use to engage staff. So it doesn't need to be expensive for SMEs to sort of meet diversity requirements. You can be very creative with it, but it's also a huge benefit. You know, you learn about your staff, you learn about what they need, you learn about what's important to them. And I think that's one of the key takeaways. And some of the SMEs that work with us that gather that information for us, they use that information to win more business. It sets them apart when they're trying to bid for local authority contracts and other things. So in that way, it becomes a sort of mutually reinforcing beneficial circle. And I think, you know, as the economy goes through changes, as organizations increasingly work on the global scale, this is something that you're going to see more and more of.
Absolutely. You're so right. I mean, it can be a real game changer, looking at this for smaller organizations who ultimately, let's face it, may not have otherwise had a look in when it comes to, you know, especially some of your bigger corporations and things like that. Actually, this is a chance for them to have affiliated with their brands some of those real large global organizations, because actually they could be, you know, serving other purpose that is not just you know, meeting volume goals or something like that, which is what, you know, honestly, I think, you know, looking back over metrics over the last, you know, 10 or even 20 years, you know, they have come a long way. And so no, I absolutely concur. If it's not something organizations are looking at, they absolutely must consider this. Absolutely must consider this. And very briefly, you know, talk to me about some of the, because I know you mentioned surveys and such like that, which I think, you know, again, and obviously, you know, that we did our recent report, and you always have the naysayers who say, oh God, not another survey. But actually, and we had that, we were like, no, it's not just another survey. This is so important. And why? But 82%, no, we had a chat offline before, but 82% in terms of response rate that you had on one of your recent employee surveys, which I wonder whether you could just give us a brief synopsis on, is pretty much, I don't want to say unheard of, because that sounds terribly negative, doesn't it? Actually, we don't want to presume that lots of workforces here are unengaged, but obviously it's been a really, really challenging time of late in particular, and I think will be, for a fair few months ahead, at least. Talk to me about the importance of surveys. I know you're preaching to the converted here, by the way, with me, obviously. Talk to me about that and how that was achieved.
Sure. So, our engagement team has to take a lot of credit for their hard work. During COVID, we made a very quick pivot to remote and agile working, and we're lucky we have the IT infrastructure to help us with that. But at the core of it, the message was around the health and well-being of our staff. And everything we do, every sort of employee practice we have, we cut biodiversity data, we do the analysis, so we get under the skin of it. And we saw engagement increase. We did, I think, 4 sort of well-being surveys over the period of COVID, which culminated in the large employee engagement survey. And that focus on the sort of the health, the well-being, including our staff, making sure that we're taking care of them, has seen our engagement scores increase dramatically. I think 19% increase, I think is what it is. And in the large employee engagement survey, we had 82% response, which is a fantastic response. But one of the questions in there was, choose 3 words which describe the HS2 culture. And inclusive was the word that was referenced more than any other. So in the word cloud, it's the biggest word, right? Which is wonderful. And of course, there are areas to improve and things to go at. There always are. But that's a real testament, I think, to how everyone across the HR function, our business functions, our leaders, our employees are so engaged in the organization and understand the efforts that we make around diversity and inclusion. And we're transparent with it. So there's often lots of good news, but there's also areas for improvement, and we're very, very, very open about that. And I think that's part of the reason. That we got to where we did. A number of years ago, we ran a similar survey, probably as far back as 4 years ago. And the feedback was a little different then. It was one of the things people identified was that they didn't really have much of a relationship with the senior leadership. They didn't know how they felt about diversity. And we took that bit of data. And again, we looked around at what worked, what people were doing. And we designed a reverse mentoring program, which it's a phenomenal success for us. In fact, it's completely oversubscribed. Every year we have far more people who want to get involved than we have senior leaders to do it. But it is a KPI for our senior leaders. It is a mandatory requirement of being a senior leader at HS2. And I like to, because we match very carefully across directorates, across characteristics, etc., it accelerates the process of accepting difference and learning from difference. If you just rely on evolution for people to sort of meet each other and engage each other, you might be waiting a long time. That kind of puts it in the revolution space. And again, this year we've had to pivot that program. So we now have a sort of an online platform. People often do their reverse mentor meetings online, but we've also created through Teams a reverse mentoring sort of notice board, if you like, where people can put in their actions, share their learning, and again, the engagement has been fantastic. And I think that again just links back to our evidence-based approach. We don't design programs or training just for the sake of it. We look at those data points across recruitment, promotion, talent, retention, engagement, and we design specific programs which have the ability to deliver improved outcomes. And we measure the impact and effectiveness of those. And then we adjust them. So, I always like to say in my job, the good news is lovely, and I love the good news. But the bad news is far more helpful. Because if I understand what the bad news is, then we can fix it. And that really is the bedrock of our approach.
It was really well articulated there, because when it comes to good news, bad news, someone once told me, a mentor actually once told me, every piece of feedback you get is a gift. Take it as a gift. And look, we're human beings. No one likes to always deal with negativity or challenges, but ultimately without that we are never going to learn, and we never are going to succeed. And as you say, and the state of play with businesses, corporations, different types of organizations these days is there are few places to hide. Everything is such a digitally transparent world almost, that actually, how much do you have to lose by being truly honest and open about things? I think the day that someone or an organization says, hey, we've made it now, we're perfect when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's like, no, you're not. There is always more to do, right? And I'm sure guys and girls have had your challenges with HS2 and everything like that. But ultimately, I'm sure you do a huge amount of this when it comes to, balancing up risk versus reward and procurement and such like. But, you look at the rewards that come out of not only diversifying procurement, really putting some, real strong metrics against it, which is really brave, as well. I still think some organizations and some individuals, and I'm sure you're thinking, yes, I know a few of those, still think, oh yeah, this is going to happen organically, it's gonna, but no, it won't. We've been saying that for years. Come on. The time is now. But some really, really good points though. And I mean, concur again. I do feel, you and I simply, we are preaching to the converted here, because I'm agreeing with everything that you're saying. And and sometimes I think, oh, but I should challenge more. But actually, I'm like, yeah, but I agree. But it is true. It's that honest, authentic, transparent approach. Because look, people are people. People are going to be critical, but at the end of the day, when it is there, black and white, and you can see those metrics starting to move, or as you say, with programs like reverse mentoring, which are emotionally incredibly fulfilling as well, they really just do expedite that process, and we can't afford to wait for it to just happen over time, because frankly we could be waiting a very long time indeed.
That's right.
Couldn't wait. Before we wrap up, Mark, because I could talk to you all day about all of this great stuff, and we must get you back again for more talk on other juicy subjects around diversity and inclusion, because I think procurement is one in particular that I just find so fascinating. But I'd love us to go into a quick lightning round, of which I'm going to give you 30 seconds only, quick fire round to answer each of the next questions. I'm going to start with the hardest one first as well, before we summarize for today. And that is, what is your secret to success?
Disruption. Yeah, look at the evidence, be disruptive. If something isn't working, just fix it. Change the process, change the way the decision is reached, but change it. Training isn't going to change anything. Change the actual process. So I think process disruption would be my takeaway on that one.
Oh, I love that. No one has ever said disruption before to that question. Absolutely brilliant. I'm also wondering now, thinking back to the time when you were interviewing with that first CEO in the story, was that the kind of thing that you said? Because clearly being different does work. It's a blooming superpower. Great answer though. And I'm sure there's been many heroes and sheroes, as we often call them, throughout your career and indeed your life, from music through to now. Which are some of those key heroes or sheroes or inspirations that have stood out for you along the journey?
Great. Well, I mean, I'm sure everyone says this, but I'll number one, I think I'd have to pick my mother's. It's just me and her growing up. My friend's nickname for her was the Dungeon Master. So you can imagine she would put me through my paces. Yeah, and I was an unruly kid too. But she kept me in line. So I think definitely watching her and her career, the sacrifices that parents make for their children, the hard work that they put in, certainly that instilled in me the feeling that if you were going to fail at something, that's fine, but make sure you failed because you put in every effort and you couldn't do it, not that you didn't put in enough effort. I think that would be one. In terms of my career, I would say that that regional manager, Sue Rosler, that I had at the disability charity that I worked for, she would have to definitely be a hero of mine. Listen, I wouldn't be talking to you if it wasn't for her, right? That was the critical incident that changed the trajectory of my career path. So here I am. And I've met some really wonderful people all across the D&I and business spectrum. But I think those people that take their time to help others, for me, that's incredibly important. And I can think of a range of people across my life that have done that, including one security guard when I was at the Juilliard School, and I'll never kind of forget what she said. Everybody gives you advice, just pick the sense from the nonsense, and you'll be all right. So I like that line.
That is a fabulous quote, and it's amazing, isn't it? Without kind of going deep into some kind of psychotherapy session here, but it is amazing how much memories, instances, feelings from a very short snippet of a conversation really stick with us and resonate and can impact very greatly some of the outcomes. And so thank you very much for sharing those. And I love the piece about your mum as well. Tough love, hey, but it is about the working hard and trying your best. It may sound a cliche, but it's always one that I remember from my father, who always says, as long as you try your best, nothing else really matters. And finally, I wonder if you could go back in time and give the young Mark, the unruly Mark, who, as you described him to start with, maybe did give your mum a run for her money and was pretty outspoken in a good way, of course. I wonder if you could go back in time and give the young Mark advice when he was younger, or someone who's in a similar situation about to embark on something and they're really not quite sure what comes next. What would you say?
I think I would say two things. Number one is it's going to work out just fine, I think. And the other is persistence overcomes resistance. So just keep going. You knock on enough doors, you wake somebody up. So that's what I would say to my younger self. As well as maybe some other advice, not for this podcast.
We can save it for later. Let's take that one offline. Absolutely brilliant. Resilience, it is absolutely. I mean, I think it's makings of some of the most successful people I've spoken with. Mark, thank you ever so much for being here today. You've been superb, absolutely superb, and true to form, I always give a very brief summary, but I don't know if I can cram it in quick enough now at the end. So what I will say is I've learned a lot from this podcast, and I really hope that everyone else has as well. I think there's so much incredible transferable knowledge here, not only from Mark, you kindly sharing your personal experience, some of those leadership lessons that frankly are relevant to all, whomever you are, whoever is listening into the podcast today, but also when it comes to some of the wider objectives of organizations, actually not just starting with, but really embedding inclusive procurement and supplier diversity into the fabric of what it is that you do really can make some of the most profound differences that you can see. And it certainly is, a key trend that, I do not see going away anytime soon. Actually, I think it, will be a staple of diverse and inclusive businesses in the future. But I think some of the pieces that really stood out were Mark, when you asked some of these, some big questions, which I think are, organizations, I hope, from the back of this podcast should be thinking themselves. Where is the biggest impact that procurement and inclusive supply chain can have within your organization? What are the strategic objectives of your company? Because by looking at those wider strategic objectives, you can, often, not even, in a really complex way, sometimes switch out for other more inclusive organizations. Thus, it's mutually beneficial. It's not a zero-sum game. This is a win-win situation. And then also finally, the measurable metrics. My goodness, it might sound dry, but I could talk about metrics all day long, because and I know a lot of you are going to be thinking, oh yes, I've heard that age-old adage, but what gets measured gets managed. It is so, so true. Be brave, put your money where your mouth is ultimately, and make sure you accelerate and expedite that process, because through things like reverse mentoring and strategic objectives like that, they benefit all. And ultimately, it's about the future generations of leaders. It's not just about where we are right now at this point. And, finally, that move, which I think was kind of almost interwoven throughout the podcast, Mark, was this move from evolution to revolution, which I just think is superb, real great motto into next year. So thank you again for joining me on the show today. I know I've kept you a little bit longer than I was meant to, so thank you and apologies.
Absolutely fine. My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Leila Delis, and you've been listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show, brought to you by Dial Global. You've been listening to the superb Mark Lomas today from HS2 Rail. If you'd like to find out any more information, or if you missed anything from the podcast, don't worry, because you'll be able to check it out on our show notes online. You can download the podcast on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast app, or visit us directly at www.dialglobal.org/podcast. See you again very soon. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.